Does the idea of swinging at your opponent's life total with a flying, lifelinking, resilient to removal threat that draws you cards sound like a fun time to you? If you answered yes to this question, then you just might be ready to put on some pants with standard white-blue auras. White-Blue Auras is a standard deck that's super fun to play, full of big, swingy attacks, and, in an unusual move for a small creature deck, surprisingly good at drawing you cards and giving you action in the late game. The game plan involves playing small creatures like Sacred Cat or Adanto Vanguard and beefing them up with auras, what we call pants in the biz, because, well, I guess it's like making your creature wear something on its legs? I don't know, just go with it. That give it certain bonuses. Some auras will grant flying, others first strike, others card draw upon dealing damage to your opponent. To keep the engine of the deck running smoothly, we have the aid of the most important card, Sram, who draws you cards when you cast auras, vehicles, or equipment. Sram is definitely a slam dunk. Self high five. Let's talk about our creatures first. We'll start small. The deck plays 4 copies of almost everything it runs, including its 1-drops, Sacred Cat, and Legion's Landing, which isn't technically a creature, but acts like one in the early game, so we're putting it here. These creatures are intended to be your turn 1 play. Turn 2, you're looking to suit them up with Curious Obsession or Cartouche of Solidarity if you think the coast is clear. Legion's Landing is great because it flips into Adanto the First Fort as soon as you attack with 3 creatures, generating you endless vampires in the later stages of the game. Sacred Cat is great because it can be embalmed from the graveyard and come back to wear more auras, crew your vehicles, or block. Plus, it gains you life, just like your vampires. Don't underestimate the power of lifelink in most matchups. Next, we have our 2-drop creatures, which is where our creature curve actually stops. My personal favorite is the 4 of Adanto Vanguard because it does a pretty good impression of a hexproof creature. Heyo, Boggles! It attacks for 3, which is awesome, and you can pay 4 life to make it indestructible until end of turn, which usually isn't a steep price in this deck due to all of the lifelink that's at your fingertips. Keep in mind, indestructible doesn't save the Vanguard from exile effects like Vraska's Contempt or Cast Out, as well as minus effects like Moment of Craving. It is, however, safe from stuff like Fumigate, Abrade, or damage dealt during combat. Adorn Pouncer, also a 4 of, rounds out your kitty brigade. Double strike is excellent on this cat, particularly if you're able to stick a Curious Obsession, which upon damage dealt to your opponent will trigger twice. Yes, drawing 2 cards! This little meow face also gets huge after embalming, a 4/4 double striker. Sometimes you can send that cat into the air with Cartouche of Knowledge to one-shot your opponent out of almost nowhere. A note about embalm here. I like to embalm before playing out the same creatures that I might have sitting in my hand because there's less chance they'll be gobbled up by the Scarab God or exiled with something like Scavenger Grounds. And here's the bread and butter of the deck, the reason for the season, the best on Kaladesh, Sram, Senior Edificer, also a 4 of. The deck would not exist without him. He's incredibly important because he can draw you a ton of cards. Your auras are cheap, and Sram can refill your hand very easily. Remember, he is legendary, so only 1 copy can be on the battlefield under your control. It would be pretty insane if you could have 2. Probably too insane. It depends on your hand and what deck your opponent is playing, but I prefer to play Sram out only when I know I can get at least 1 draw off of him. That often means waiting until turn 3. Even if your opponent tries to kill Sram, you can still cast your auras or vehicles in response and get a draw trigger. Now for the icing on the cake, the auras. Curious Obsession is fantastic, and we run 4. It gives your dude +1/+1 and will draw you a card whenever the creature wearing it deals combat damage to the opponent. It does have a drawback though, it falls off if you didn't attack with any creatures on your turn. So try not to let that happen, okay? I mean, who doesn't want to be attacking? Remember, it can be any creature that attacks. It does not need to be the one wearing Curious Obsession. At 1 mana, we really can't ask for anything more. We also run 4 Cartouche of Solidarity, which grants first strike and makes you a nice little vigilant warrior to boot. This is probably the weakest of the auras and one I might be looking to replace with the release of Dominaria, grabbing Arcane Flight instead, maybe 2 of each. I'll have to test it out. 4 Cartouche of Knowledge rounds out our aura suite. I can't decide whether I like this or Curious Obsession more, actually, because flying is insanely good in standard right now, and if you have a Sram in play, the double draw once this thing hits the battlefield feels like cheating. The only vehicle we run is a 3 of Ether Sphere Harvester. It's really good in this deck. Not only does it trigger a draw off of Sram, it is insanely easy to crew with a crew cost of 1. Our deck can make a lot of 1-power creatures, and it gains you life. I did mention how good life gain is, didn't I? And now for our secret ingredient, 4 copies of Spell Pierce. I know, right? No one ever expects 4 copies of Spell Pierce. For real, your opponent will not be expecting this. This card has single-handedly won me so many games. Remember to keep this up for stuff like Settle the Wreckage, Fumigate, or Vraska's Contempt, which your opponent will almost always tap out to cast. They pretty much have to. Plus, if they can pay the 2 for it later in the game, and you hadn't already won, you're probably just losing anyway. This build runs 6 islands, 5 plains, 3 copies of Shephet Dunes if you need to pump up your team and have been going off with the Danto the First Fort, 4 Glacial Fortress, an amazing card, and 3 irrigated farmland that you can use to help with flood later in the game. But don't be afraid to play it early if you need the colors. And that's the deck. It's so much fun to play and way better than it looks on paper. It's also one of the cheapest decks you can play in Standard right now at less than $80 for the whole shebang. Here's some quick tips. Remember all of your draw triggers and to crew properly before combat begins. Keeping up blue mana for Spell Pierce is paramount later in the game and can be your key to victory. Sram can also help you dig for what you need when you need it, such as a Sacred Cat for a key block or a copy of Cartouche of Knowledge to head for the skies. I mentioned that I'm interested in Arcane Flight and Dominaria. I'm also looking at Dauntless Bodyguard, which is a 2/1 that you can sacrifice to give a creature you control indestructible. I'd also like to test out Seal Away as efficient removal. Only time and testing will tell if these will be solid inclusions. If you've tried them out, let me know in the comments. My current deck list and sideboard is listed in the notes below the video, so check that out. As always, it is metagame dependent, so be sure to tune your list and especially your sideboard before you head to any tournament. Be aware too that there are other versions of this deck out there that you might want to check out. My list went 10-5 at GP Seattle before Dominaria was released, and is slightly more controlling than the other versions, which play cards like Slippery Scoundrel or even Sram's Expertise and Pride of Conquerors, which allows a deck to go a little bit wider. So get out there and play and have fun. But remember, don't leave home without your pants.